All right, welcome everyone to SOCI's 364 Dine and Dialogue Interfaith panel. We are so glad you found the time to come out and join us today. This is an interfaith event, and as such, we want to make it clear that this event is all about us in this room and what we get out of it. We hope that this event will stimulate discussion and hopefully broaden all of our perspectives just a little bit more. My name is Mary Claire Donnie-Levix, and first off, I would like to thank my other group members, Nina Kaluri, Caitlin Zeller, Kai De Silva Beretta, Grace Morgan, and Leanne Cunningham. We would also like to thank our Professor Considine for his support in this project. Without his aid, this event never would have happened. We would also like to take the time to introduce and thank our panelists. We are so grateful they decided to take time to come here today. First off, we have Sasha Ajaz. She is the president of Rice Muslim Student Association. Sasha is a senior at Weiss College, majoring in ecology and evolutionary biology, and minoring in poverty, justice, and human capabilities. She has served as the director of outreach for the Houston chapter of United Muslim Relief and as the outreach coordinator for Monib Council. Next, we have Pastor Jonathan Swirsky. Jonathan Swirsky is a youth pastor at Bottom Creek Baptist Church. He received his master's in divinity from Liberty Theological Seminary, and he has received his call to ministry at an early age. Next, we have Fatih Ozcan. Fatih is currently the executive director of the Dialogue Institute of the Southwest, headquartered in Houston. Since 2004, Mr. Ozcan has worked in various capacities for the Dialogue Institute as well as the broader Hizmet civil society service movement in the U.S. and is the founder of the Kansas branch of the Dialogue Institute, who organizes Whirling Dervishes programs, annual dialogue and friendship dinners, interfaith panels, and international trips. He also helped launch the Earl Hill Interfaith Academy and the Voices Against Extremism Project, and has served as the treasurer for the historic Mississippi Religious Leadership Conference and Interfaith Civil and Human Rights Organization. He previously served as teacher and principal of the Sicaria Tutoring Center. Mr. Ozcan is currently pursuing his PhD in educational leadership at Jackson State University and his master's in Muslim-Christian relations at Harvard Seminary. Thank you, and here's Caitlin presenting our next three panelists.
Hi, my name is Caitlin, and our next panelist is Ahmed Monib. Ahmed is the son of Egyptian immigrants who landed in Stillwater, Oklahoma, but eventually found their way to New York, Delaware. He was raised in a Muslim family with parents that taught him to never stop talking to God. After 9/11, he seriously questioned his purpose in life and the Islamic dogma he heard around him. After a failed attempt to become an FBI agent, Ahmed turned to Sufism, the spiritual science of Islam. Next, we have Reverend Janelle Rozek Hooper. Reverend Hooper serves as a campus pastor for Houston Lutheran Campus Ministry at Rice. She grew up in Houston, but attended graduate school for her master's in divinity in Chicago and served 3 congregations in Illinois. Last but definitely not least, we have Timothy Crouch. Timothy Crouch is a junior from Weiss College, majoring in viola performance, and is the president of Chi Alpha Christian Fellowship at Rice University. He also periodically coordinates and leads Reconnect, an inter-ministry Christian worship collective at Rice, and is an advisory member of Rice Christians for Racial Reconciliation. Once again, thank you all for taking the time to be here this afternoon. We are so excited to have you all here with us today. We would like to kick things off by just going down the line and having each panelist discuss their experience with the interfaith cause and their work within their faith community. If Sasha would like to begin and just give her experience. Thank you all so much.
So when I first came to Rice as a freshman and sophomore, I was really involved in the Body Council, and that's what got me into interfaith. And so through my work with the Body Council, we've hosted a variety of events just during Interfaith Week, but we also have championed for minority faith rights on campus as well. So we've got the meditation room opened on campus, which is actually to the left there. And through my work as the president of the Muslim Student Association, we've really focused on having events where we co-sponsor with other clubs. So for example, like a couple months ago, we had an event with Jewish students on campus, and it was co-sponsored with them, and we had just kind of like a casual talk and dinner, and through co-sponsoring, we hope to bring members from different groups who can plan the event together, and then their friends are more likely to come to this event versus if like the Muslim students just hosted it. So those are just some of the things that we like to do and how I've been involved in Interfaith.
Well, my name is Jonathan Swirsky, as y'all heard. I'll be honest, I don't have a whole lot of formal experience in interfaith dialogue, but grew up with friends of different faiths and have neighbors of different faiths as well. And I'm always very excited to talk about matters of spirituality and religion. And so I'm very excited to participate in something like this.
And I am Fatih Ozcan. When I grew up young in Turkey, and my mom, when I told my mom that I want to go to United States in 2001, I believe, she said, "Are you crazy? You want to go to, like, people are shooting one another?" I realized that US is not like that to me, but then I realized that she grew young with the cowboy movies and Jesse James and Harrison Ford, and anything that she knows is from what she can learn from Harrison Ford. So, but the youth, their impression is more like whatever they can get from the Sex and the City and Depressed Housewives. So about the United States. So when I come here, I realize that we have a huge gap, really, really huge gap in our perceptions, and even little information, little touch would help fill that gap. When I remember movies or TV news that I watched in the United States, news was about the Middle East. There was a guy with the bullets here, and then he is holding two guards in the back, and then the knives on the table, and he is presenting the news. I was like, if it is the image of the Islam in the United States, I'm in trouble, basically. So very few months with no English, I knocked the door of the church, and then I said, I am here for dialogue. I don't know if they understood or not, but at least I took one step forward. And so it's my dialogue journey in the United States started that way. Then I continue my life like this.
So Ahmed, Monib, as you saw, kind of like Jonathan, I'm not formally doing any interfaith. I'm not part of any interfaith organization specifically, but in my younger days I was actively involved in the Muslim Student Association and did a lot of outreach then. I think now, and maybe as we get through the discussion, I would love to talk about that. Now I would say most of my interfaith activity is around the practical day-to-day life interactions and really setting the stage for interfaith outside of formal gatherings, because I think that I really believe that's where it needs to happen. And then I think, especially in the Muslim community, there's a lot of interfaith dialogue, if you will, that needs to happen within the Muslim community. I think Muslims in America are facing a spiritual crisis, and there's a lot of dialogue that needs to happen within the Muslim community as well as outside the Muslim community, and so that's where I strive to put my efforts.
I'm Pastor Hooper, and I think my interfaith dialogue started just as a young person in elementary school and having friends that were Jewish or Muslim and different faith. So I think those dialogues started really early and just participating in each other's, going to their different places of worship and such. And then more formally in seminary, we had classes on it and attended different places as well and had more training. And now as a pastor, I've taught classes mostly on Christian Muslim dialogue back in Illinois and built relationships with the local mosque and had Muslims come speak to our congregation and those kinds of things. So I did that in the parish. I also serve at the University of Houston doing campus ministry there, where there's a much larger Muslim population, and I did a panel like this after Harvey and talked about our interfaith coming together, how we did that after Harvey for Harvey relief, and then just interfaith weeks that we do here at Rice and U of H the last 2 years that I've been doing campus ministry.
My name is Timothy Crouch, as Caitlin mentioned, and as a couple of my fellow panelists, have said, I don't have a whole lot of formal experience with interfaith activity. Caitlin mentioned from my bio that I am involved in Rice Christians for Racial Reconciliation, and that is where most of my sort of activist energy has gone in recent years. But I see that as being part of this bigger project of, we have these challenges with differences, and as Ahmed was saying, bit of a head cold. We have within Christianity in America our own sorts of interfaith dialogues between Catholics and Orthodox and, oh my gosh, so many varieties of Protestants. And so I hope that I'm involved in those dialogues as well, but I feel responsibility to be involved in the conversation between different faith groups as well, Christians and Muslims particularly, because I'm involved with Chi Alpha Christian Fellowship, which is one of the largest student groups at Rice, and so whether or not we expected that this burden would fall upon us, it has come upon us anyways, and we need to be involved in these conversations by virtue of our presence. So that's why I'm here.
So now that we've gotten a chance to get a little bit of brief information about our panelists, first I just wanted to once again thank my group for all the work that they've been putting in with me this semester to put this together, but more importantly to thank all of you all for taking time out of your day to spend with us with an issue that matters very deeply to us. So I just wanted to, pose a more general question to the panel and then get this conversation started and see where you all would want to take it. And that question would be, what does religious pluralism mean to you? Whether it's in the context of your faith, if it's in the context of your culture, where you were raised, how you were raised, or even just in the context of a wider social issue that you're interested in that doesn't have to do with your faith at all. So feel free to answer any part of that from any lens. And we can start with Tim, and go back along the line. If you, and at any point in time, if there's a different question that comes up that you'd like to answer, that's also something we want to have a conversation with you all,
So the question was, what does religious pluralism mean to me? Is that right?
Yes.
I would say that what religious pluralism means to me is that within a society like the United States of America, you can have different groups of people who hold different fundamental beliefs about the nature of the world. And that nonetheless, we have between these groups a capacity to talk to one another about it based on the recognition that even if we hold differing fundamental beliefs, we still believe that there are fundamental beliefs and that it's good to talk about them rather than to confront one another violently about them.
I'm going to talk a little bit from a Lutheran lens in particular. And we have a theology that God comes to us first. So everything after that is a response to God. So God comes to us. The gift of faith is just that. It's a gift. It's not something that I come up with on my own either. It's also a gift from God. And so my role is to respond then the best that I can. But things like Christian terms of salvation, meaning according to the Bible, soteria in Greek, wholeness. So being a whole person, or my rightness with God, righteousness, doesn't rely on me, because it's God who always comes to me first. And so whether I do a good job of living a faithful life or not, salvation, my wholeness, my rightness with God is not dependent on what I believe or how I act. And so for Lutherans, we have a pretty, I would say, open sense of pluralism, that God comes to all of us. It's God's choice who God comes to, and how God expresses God's self, and it's God's gift of faith to everyone. So there's not a sense of judgment, technically. I wouldn't say every Lutheran lives that out faithfully, but in general, that's what our theology is. And so pluralism for me is a healthy dose, I think, of humbleness, that God has many expressions. At the end of the day, God is mystery, and it's God's choice for me and for everyone else. And so the best I could do is not judge or figure out exactly how that is. I was raised as a Christian. I've studied as a Christian. Christianity is what gives me life and purpose, and that doesn't, in my understanding, negate the way other people have a faith tradition. And so pluralism is open to God coming to us. And so personally, I mentioned I grew up in Houston, and I had a Catholic on the left and a Hindu on the right, so my neighbors, and we played with them. I went to worship services with them. My parents raised us very open. And so I feel like there was just always in our neighborhood and in my relationships an openness to discovery and being friends with people. And then my faith just always being a place where it wasn't a place of judging whether I was right or wrong, or they were right or wrong, but trusting that we're all doing our best to live generously in the world.
Well, to me, religious pluralism means that there's more than one religion. No, I'm just kidding. It's a really good question and a tough one. And when you posed it in the email, I really tried to think about it. To me, that question ties in very much as to why we even need to have interfaith dialogue, right? Because why is there many faiths, and why do we need to talk about it, right? And so one could easily say that, well, yes, there's religious pluralism, but I don't have to participate in that. I can just be a Muslim by myself and tolerate everyone around me. And by the way, I hate the word tolerance. Tolerance sounds very condescending, right? It's like, I will bear with you as long as I can. And it's also a very fragile term. The minute something goes wrong, tolerance is out the window. And so, to me, religious pluralism, it's recognizing that there is something godly in each of us that we have, and I mean, God created all of us, right? And in the Islamic tradition, we say that God breathed His Spirit into man, and so if you truly believe that, then you have to believe that to find God, one has to look into the hearts of all those people around them. You know, as I mentioned, I follow a Sufi tradition, which means I have a teacher, a spiritual teacher, and my sheikh always says, like, the biggest door to finding God and the biggest veil to finding God at the same time is the hearts of people, you know. And if you don't seek to remove that veil by loving people and seeing beyond it, then you will never find God. And so it's imperative that if we seek God, that we do so by not being afraid to engage with people of different faiths, because we have different insights. We have different, I think Rumi was the one who said, and my Turkish friend here probably knows Rumi much better than I do, but he said that, you know, it's like a blind man trying to eat an elephant. You know, one touches the leg and says it's a tree, you know, and someone else touches the trunk and says it's something else. But there's no way to recognize that it's an elephant without everybody participating together and offering their insights so that we can find God, you know. And to me, that's what's important about religious pluralism.
Since you mentioned Rumi, I would like to start.
Good lead-in, right?
No, actually, I didn't intend to, but it just inspired me with the poetry that he has. Come, whoever you are, even though you break your vows 1,000 times, come again. Idolaters, fire worshippers, or followers of other faith, ours is not a caravan of despair. Come again. So to me, the religious pluralism lies in that context. It is God's plan. Just let's think about it. It is a God's plan. God intendedly created multinational, multi-religious society. If he wanted to be one nation, one group, one society, he would create that way. There is a verse in the Quran, in the chapter called Hujurat, saying that we created humanity as group by group, community by community, and nations by nations, for them to get to know each other. The terminology that was used is ta'arifu, which means communication but also elevation, meaning that you will get in a better position, you'll get better than previous one when you get communicated with whoever you define as others. So to me, religious pluralism is like a God's plan that is serving for the greater purposes.
So there's going to be lots of different definitions of pluralism. You know, if you ask anybody, you're going to get very different views. And so I think if we're talking about pluralism as a worldview, I think we would all acknowledge there's going to be certain truths that each of our religions hold, really that any major worldview holds, that are going to conflict with other worldviews, right? So if we're talking about pluralism in the sense of all religions have an equal claim to truth, that's just going to be contradictory. But if we're talking about pluralism in the sense of interfaith dialogue, reaching out to others, right? Finding areas of commonality where we can work together, like you mentioned with your post-Harvey efforts, right? Places where, you know, we can find areas of agreement such as, you know, Islam and Christianity both believe very strongly in helping the poor, right? And reaching out to them. Those are areas where we want to focus, I think, our pluralistic efforts. And I think pluralism is strongest not when we ignore the major differences that we have, but when we acknowledge them, right? We're upfront about them, like the differences of, you know, the view of the nature of man and the nature of God, and we have a conversation about those. And Christianity is all about relationships. And so although, you know, I'm always going to be very upfront with anybody that I want them to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, that's not my only goal in interfaith dialogue. That's not my only goal in reaching out, because relationships are valuable in and of themselves, right? And so pluralism, in as far as building relationships with others, is going to be very, very valuable, especially if it can lead to cooperation and humanitarian efforts.
So the other panelists touched upon the spiritual aspects of pluralism. Well, so I'm going to touch upon practical aspects of pluralism. And so I think what usually happens at a lot of these interfaith events is that the people who want to engage in pluralism are usually the people that show up. So pluralism to me in a society is when religious pluralism specifically is, as other panelists said, actively engaging in conversations, in knowing one another, and generally also caring for the other. Realize pluralism.
And I think a lot of you alluded to my next question, which is, so we have a visiting scholar, Ryan Glasser, who is coming to our class on Tuesday. She works with the Center for Muslim and Christian Studies at the University of Oxford in the UK, and she specifically asked me to pose this question. She sent me a lot of great questions to discuss with you all. But so Sasha and Pastor Swirsky both alluded to this, but I guess my question is twofold. What do you do when you interact with somebody, whether it's on the basis of faith or otherwise, who you do share fundamental disagreements with, whether that is in how they go about practicing their faith or whether they choose not to practice faith at all? And then secondarily, you know, in all these working definitions of pluralism, what do we do as a society, as a campus, as congregations, as people who lead other people, and by example, to engage people who otherwise wouldn't care about these conversations? Feel free to answer any part of that that interests you.
jump in any order?
Yeah, whoever wants to start.
I'll jump in because I'm getting old and I forget what I'm going to say. I think one of the challenges with interfaith, to be quite honest, if we're talking about getting it out to the general population, it's kind of boring, right? I mean, to sit in a setting and hear various religious leaders and scholars talk about theological differences, that's not going to reach the people that need to reach it. Like you're saying, it's kind of like us preaching to the choir, right? So for me, I think we need to challenge the definition of what dialogue means. I don't think dialogue means talking at each other. I think it means being with each other in a social context. I think, for example, and this could be controversial, but right, maybe like Muslims in America, for example, from my experience, this is just my understanding, by the way. I don't speak for Muslims in America by any means, but we are very good culturally with other minority cultures. With the African American culture, with the Hispanic culture, but with the white American culture, most Muslims I know are either sons of immigrants or African Americans, and we don't play softball, we don't do barbecue, we don't bass fish, we don't hunt. And if you're going to have an interfaith dialogue with somebody, you need to participate in the cultural activities of that society that you live in. And I think that kind of outreach that's beyond just talking about religion. In other words, have friends first, then talk about religion. I'll shut up.
I think anytime we're talking about the differences in faiths, we have to do what Jesus said and speak the truth, but speak the truth in love, right? We have to always have that common agreement that although we have disagreements, we're going to come away from this conversation with respect and hopefully deeper respect for each other as we've talked. And so I think practical things to do though. So one of the mosques closest to our church in West Houston hosted an open house, which I thought was an excellent idea. Kind of one of those more formal types of things, but something that was very open. Unfortunately, schedule did not permit me to go, but that was something I greatly appreciated. So those types of events that are really open to the community, I think, are great. They increase that dialogue. But I would agree with what you said. It's about relationships. It's about, formal events are good. They're important, right? They show that we care about these things. But it is about just building relationships with people, right? Having those conversations. And it doesn't mean the first time you have a conversation with somebody of a different faith, you only talk about faith, right? Obviously, that's if you're somebody that believes in God, that's a big central part of who you are, but you see value in that person just for who they are themselves. And so you build that relationship, and then the faith conversations come, you find that commonality. I think a big part of it that we can do within our own faiths is challenge certain assumptions that others in our faith have about other faiths. And so working with youth, right? Some of the youth that I work with grow up and know Muslims very well and have a pretty good understanding of Muslim belief. Others don't interact with Muslims a whole lot, and so their interaction with Muslims is what they see in the news, right? And obviously sometimes they're going to come away with some false beliefs about what the majority of Muslims believe. And so when I hear them say things, like, oh, well, all Muslims want to do fill in the blank, right? I'm like, well, that's really not true, right? Obviously there might be some people that want to do that, right? And so I'm going to call out the misconceptions, right? And of course, when I see Christians acting in a non-Christian way, right, I'm going to hold them to the standard of the Bible. And so really, a big part of it is encouraging those that we have in our own, communities and congregations to challenge their preconceptions, right, and line it up with who they really know, right? Don't think a Muslim is what you see in the media. Think a Muslim is the Muslim that lives next door to you and that you get to have a conversation with.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that. What you're alluding to with the standard of the Bible is that in the Christian theological concept that we are all made in the image of God, and that is the framework for how we all interact with one another. So this goes directly into what you were saying, Ahmed, about having friends of other faiths, of other ethnicities, because as a person, I have been created in the image of God, as have you, and I have a responsibility to honor the image of God that I see in you and to affirm the dignity that God has given to you by creating you in his image, whether or not we agree about who God is.
Can I jump in? While I'm speaking, could you open the page 7 so that I would like to show you data. I believe that the word interfaith dialogue is, to me, is the wrong term. term is being used. I rather choose to use interfaithful dialogue because religions generally don't do dialogue. Theologies are really don't want to do dialogue at all. In fact, I realize that Islam theology adopted a lot of things from the Old Testament and New Testament that really, but we don't accept that, by the way. So the religions is not ready to be in dialogue, but rather followers of religion is ready to be in dialogue. So in that regard, of course, this communication. I believe that dialogue is like a part of a great project. And to me, it is a first step toward accomplishing greater purpose. And without that first step, of course, it wouldn't happen. To me, the next step should be engagement. The dialogue, you just start, if you look at the dialogue theories, without having any prior reservations, you basically start having a conversation, but you don't have any secret agenda or unsecret agenda. So basically, you're just free flow of conversation. The dialogue theories say that way. But we need to go beyond that, meaning that we need to come to the level of engagement. I would like to show you a data, which is this one. The research in India, comparing the like a Calicut. If there's someone from India, I apologize for my pronunciation. And also Aligarh. It's like two little towns. One is from the north and one is from the south. And they choose that town because the sample of that town really represent the similarities in between as historically as well as the number of different groups in that area. And when I look at this, like Calicut is very famous with the neighborly engagements and also lots of activities. The other is not. I look at the Aligarh, and then I was like, I couldn't find it in the list. Actually, it's a research because apparently they come to a conclusion that the Calicut, it is not in the list. How am I going to compare? I was thinking, then I realized that there is no crime over there. Meaning that though the Calicut, who is a high engagement, had end up having no crime. And then while the Aligarh is probably it is 7 or 8 in the, kind of somewhere on the top.
Yeah.
When they analyze the data deeper, those in the high engagement area, which is Calicut, basically develop better sense about others. Because neighborly is not like a dialogue between a Muslim and a Christian. It comes outside of that concept. Still you have that perception, but now it became more natural level. Dialogue with your neighbor, which is very essential. Love your neighbor. And how are you going to love them if you don't know them? See, love your whatever. Be a good representative of your faith, but not with your, the speech. And data show that your presence as a Christian, as a Muslim, as a Hindu, is work better than talk. Just be there as you are, act as you are, which will serve better, the service. So I would like to highlight on this. So because of that, I believe that any dialogue activities, I don't mean that those you just go and listen, which is good as well. But any dialogue activities like this, as well as you become like more engagement. I believe that the dialogue concept needs to go toward more engagement rather than just speak. So it's my.
So I think you said more dialogue than just speaking, so I just want to follow up on that. I think interfaith dialogue should be like any healthy relationship that you have, where you listen to the person, like truly listen to them, where you use I statements. You know, you learn that for relationships, you need to use I statements like, I feel that, this isn't working for us or whatever. And then you also talk from your own experience, right? Like, I can say, as a Christian, I have experienced God powerfully in the bread and the wine that I receive. And who can really say, no, you didn't? You know, you can disagree and think, well, I don't think they did, but I'm telling you from my experience that I did. And then they can tell me, like, I from my experience, such and such and such. So I think those healthy relationship dynamics are good for any kind of interfaith dialogue. And then just kind of like specifically, I think Sasha was also asking for what could happen. And I would mention 3 things, particularly here at Rice. I serve as the vice president for the Joint Council of JCM, Joint Campus Ministers here. And one of the ways that works is that to be on that, someone has to be a representative from their denomination and have like official letters of their role. And so because of the way Islam is structured, having more of a student-centered body, so as the president, but not having like, for instance, the same thing as like an imam or someone on campus is a struggle for both Rice and I can say at U of H, so that we're at both campuses, we're missing that participation at the table of the same kind of representative. And so, although there are Muslims here at Rice, there isn't a representative at our monthly meetings. Same thing at U of H, and that's a real issue. I feel like we need to figure out how to work that out because we need to work that out. So that would be one practical thing I would talk about. The other would be study abroad programs. You know, I think studying abroad in countries that are very different from our own, and where is Rice offering those study abroad programs, and does it have anything to do with culture or religion, and like, is there any class that brings you back and processes that experience with you? I think those kind of engagements are really important. And then books. I was thinking about, I have 2 kids, 6 and 8, and we read books about Hanukkah together, read books about I never know how to say it right, Eid al-Fitr, the holy day, the Eid
al-Fitr.
Eid al-Fitr, see, I didn't say it right. But we read it, and it's about colors, and like the colors of plums, and then the colors of the Quran, and then the colors of the light. So we try to do those children's books, and I think from a young age, just like having those conversations, but then in a scholarly way here at Rice, like, where are your textbooks coming from? Where are your books coming from? Are they coming from a diversity of genders and backgrounds and, religious backgrounds, or are all your science books written by white men? So think about that, and I think your professors can think about that. Maybe I love about Rice is you're able to push back with your professors. So if you find your curriculum is like all white men, then, maybe you have a chance to go talk to them and say like, maybe you don't go and say, I'd like a Muslim, I don't know, but you might say, I'd like a little bit more diversity in the authors of it, and then you yourself go out and do it, because I know y'all are awesome like that. You can do that.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that, because that's actually one of our projects the project that I'm taking on for April is trying to reach out to the Islamic Society of Greater Houston to figure out if we can get like a chaplain to serve for both Rice and U of H, so maybe that's something we can discuss later. Yeah, so that, and then also expanding on your point about books, one practical thing that I've done throughout my time at Rice is engage in book exchanges. This is something you can do on an individual level, so I know there was like a period of time where this book was circulating amongst the Christians at Rice, titled Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. And so my Christian friend, he was telling me he was reading it, and I was like, instead of you reading that book, why don't I read that book and then I give you a book to read? And so I read that book, and then I gave him a book titled The Quran, the Bible, and Science. And then he read that, and I read that book. I read the book he gave me, and then we had like a 3-hour maybe discussion about it. And so I think engagements like that on an individual level is something that you can definitely do. And then on a more formal level, I mentioned it earlier, but co-hosting events, this is something that's, I think, very applicable to Rice campus, because we're all very busy in our own schedules. And so usually like the people who come to events are the people who like were in charge of like planning the events, or like have friends who plan the events. And so when you bring two organizations together to plan an event, then you're not only getting to engage with that other group throughout the process of planning the event, but also more members of either event are more likely to come. And this is something that I've just kind of realized throughout my experiences. And then on a more broader scale, I think that in order to really expand pluralism in society, it has to start from reforming childhood education, because in terms of like the books that the state government chooses for children to learn at an early age, like a lot of these books have like very demonizing explanations of like minority religions, and so there's like an institutional basis as well to this, and so I think it has to come from a much earlier stage in order to get everyone engaged. And then also, like not all communities, especially like rural America, not all communities are going to have a variety of religions. So I think a lot of what we've been talking about today has been very applicable to like urban areas, but in rural areas where, let's say there isn't a diversity of religion, I think it's only really through education that you can get those different perspectives.
No one has anything to add to that. I have a question as well. So based on that, so when dealing with communities where exposure may not be possible, what sort of steps do you think parents, congregation leaders, school teachers, school districts, youth groups can take, both in, I guess, the ways they converse, but also the actions that they take toward the children in that community to, I guess, make up for the fact that maybe that physical exposure and relationship bonding experience isn't there?
Was as a youth pastor, back in January and February, we did a 6-week comparative religions on our Monday night high school group. And so we talked about, the differences between Christianity and Islam, Christianity and other views as well. And we were very careful to be to take our sources not just from what Christians have said about those, but from, what has a Muslim said about Islam, right? So to go back to the source itself. And I think that's really important. And as far as education, I think, although if we could get some institutional changes, that'd be good. I'm a little pessimistic when it comes to institutional changes, and I think a lot of it really has to take place more so from the parents and the families, right? So as a Christian, I'm very confident in what the Bible says, and so I'm not afraid, to show my child, something from a different faith perspective, right? And talk about, hey, here's the things that we agree on, here's the things we have in common, here's the differences that we have, right? Here's how we can build relationships and have great relationships as a family with these other different families. So I don't think it's going to come from the state too much, to be honest. And I don't even know if that's necessarily the purpose of the state when we're talking about a public education system. But I do, not that it couldn't happen, that would be great, right? But I do think that it's going to come from families, and families are going to be influenced by churches, mosques, right, faith groups like that, to take a look at those things. If we're confident about what we believe, we shouldn't be afraid to look at other faiths and to know what they believe. Now, obviously, of course, I'm going to raise my child according to a certain faith tradition, but I want them to be exposed to other faiths and to know that they shouldn't be afraid to go up to talk to anybody that looks different or has a different religion than they do, but instead to look forward to those exchanges. So I think it's going to happen on a much more local level.
So is your question, just to make sure I understand it, like if you're in some small town in the middle of America somewhere with no Muslims, how do you reach out to those folks to teach them about the religions that...
What steps do you think influential people, adults, families, school
I'm going to say it does belong in our public education system. Not so much talking about faiths per se, but giving that diversity of people behind it. So if we're reading Huckleberry Finn, what else are we reading? And so I think that, you know, Texas having its own curriculum can be a little too insider-ish instead of being with the whole United States. And I think that all of our representatives and everything how you vote and who you elect and how that decides the Board of Education and what gets put in our curriculum is really important, because I think we absolutely can be reading books by people of different faiths or that have a non-Christian perspective just in the writing of even a fiction book. And so I think there is something to do at the larger level. I do think that someone in rural Texas who has now read a book by an African Muslim that may have nothing to do with Africa or Islam, but just that the author is there and they're required to read it and it's a part of their understanding of the world and it's presented as a normal part of curriculum, I think can go a long way at the end of the day.
I think we need to realize that we have common problems. I think dialogue is the first step to get to know each other, but we need to realize that we have a common problems. I think what can really unite us is kind of high human values that is accepted all over the world, and if we can build trust and then we can cooperate on the common problems and common issues. But first we need to really learn how to talk, and we need to learn how to work together, but the trust is that kind of essential for that. I would like to show you one thing which is like page 3, like a thermometer of the religious community's perception in the United States. In the US public has a warmest feeling for Jews, Catholic, and evangelists. Warmest means 63 out of 100, which is the warmest in all the faith groups. And then Muslims in that thermometer is like 40, which is I'm glad that it's like they choose a Celsius thermometer. No, they choose. If it were to be Fahrenheit, that would be even worse. So we have some little warm in society. And the next slide shows the thermometer for the Republicans versus Democrats. If we can go to that one. So among the Republicans, evangelical Christians is 71. Jews, number 2, 67, Catholic 66. When you go to the Muslims, it is below 80s, which is 33, which is closer to, the 0. And then when you look at the Democrats, Jews is kind of on the top, Catholics in the second, Buddhists in the third, and then Muslims is below the Mormons and atheists in the Democrats' view. So when you look at overall perception of the faithfulness or the faith communities, our average is around 50 little plus, our average. So this is an issue that kind of a stereotype that was naturally created in the society. I think our dialogue, we can be in a dialogue to work this. And we have many common problems that one community cannot solve by itself because the problem gets globalized. Like terrorism. Terrorism is not just some organization doing some bad things in somewhere. When terrorism happens in UK, it affects Houston. Because it has the effect that rather than love, which we are all teaching love in our most churches, synagogue, and then we want love to be the driving force. Now with these bad incidents, the hatred starts becoming a driving force. I really like the St. Augustine's kind of influence on the Christian interpretation of Bible, which is if your interpretation is not parallel to the law, that means your interpretation is wrong. I think we need to adopt that concept within our life. And then we can kind of work together toward, terrorism, against terrorism or extremism issues. And also we have many other common problems that if we build a trust among each other, I think it will serve for greater purpose.
I think we have time for one more go around, but this time I wanted to focus on maybe issues that are not so overtly related to faith. And so if y'all wouldn't mind, I'd like each of you to share something either within your faith community or just in your life that you're involved in that matters to you. Something that you work on, something that you're passionate about, because after this we're all going to move into the RMC and there's lots of food and we're actually going to do what you guys described, which is try to form relationships with each other. And I think that I want our audience to be able to get to know something about you all that matters to you so they can find someone they connect with. And so that, but then also one step that you prescribe, either just like someone in your own faith community or something that you plan to do within your own faith community to, I guess, advance like a good interfaithful dialogue. So those two things, if y'all can address that, I think that would be really beneficial to everyone.
I personally am going to go fishing because I found, I'll give a really small story, and maybe that kind of sums up my philosophy on things. So I'm not a great fisherman, although, as a fisherman, you're supposed to lie and say how big your fish is. But, I used to work in construction and I had a really good friend, and I told him, hey, I want to get into fishing. And he was a professional, semi-professional fisherman. He said, Ahmed, the best way to become a fisherman is to go on a Bass Pro tournament with me, okay? I had no idea what I was getting into. He took me to the Bass Pro shop and we bought several $100s worth of fishing gear for me. I tried to hide the receipt from my wife as long as I could. And then we headed up to Missouri in the middle of the winter to enter this bass fishing tournament. I was the only non-white guy in the entire tournament. And I was quite intimidated, actually. It was a very, very different cultural experience. When I got on the boat, they pair you randomly with somebody. And these are guys that are going for a $50,000 prize, okay? So this is pretty serious for a guy who barely knows how to tie one knot to be involved in, but my friend said this is the best way to learn. I get on the boat with my 2 fishing rods, and folks are kind of laughing at me, right? They're like, boy, you must be an amazing fisherman to only have 2 fishing rods. Everyone else had 10 rods and all kinds of different lure and that kind of stuff. And you go out on the water on this lake, this massive lake, this was Table Rock Lake, and you're there 8 hours, okay, with one other guy on the boat, okay? And here I am on a boat with a guy who keeps calling me Omar because he can't remember my name. So he's like, hey, Omar, And I tell you what, when we started our trip, he was kind of mean to me at first, right? He was like, he'd like push off the boat. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, oh God, you can't do anything. One time his rod hooked on mine and it snagged, and he was so mad at me, right? So it was, but I tell you what, I tried to remember our prophetic example and stayed patient and nice. And by the end of 8 hours, we exchanged phone numbers. We were best friends. He was asking me questions about Islam, about, stereotypes I hadn't heard since I was a kid, but he was sincere in asking them, And he said to me, Omar, you're the best co-angler I've ever fished with. You're polite, you listen, and so to me, that's interfaith. That I got to befriend somebody in a setting that I was uncomfortable in, and maybe left somebody that's going to go away, hopefully saying, not all Muslims are so bad. And to me, that's where I'm focusing my life now. So I'm going to continue fishing. That's my.
Yeah, but it's funny to me that you say that, just because that's Jesus said, "Go be fishers of men," and his first disciples were fishermen. So I think that's absolutely right. That's how it happens. By taking that leap of faith. And I'm sure you had no idea how that trip was going to go when you left to Missouri, but then you reaped all the benefits from it, and so did he. So definitely taking steps like that. I think for me, something I'm very passionate about And something that I believe people of any monotheistic or really any spiritual religion can be passionate about, or anybody actually, is adoption, right? That's something that's very near and dear to our family. We've adopted. Most of you might be aware, or if not, it's an important thing to know. The U.S. has actually severely dropped in terms of the international adoptions it makes. And I think we could all agree that we want orphans to have loving homes, regardless of the faith that we're growing up in. We want them to have parents that love them, that are caring for them, and that's a big part of my faith. As far as what I'm personally going to do to increase those, I'm on a first-name basis with my Muslim neighbors. I have some across the street and then catty-corner to me, but I haven't actually gotten to sit down with them very much and talk with them, and that's something that I felt convicted about doing and want to do more. So that's something that I'm going to reach out to do.
When I came to the United States in August of 2002, it was a few months after, I realized that lots of things changing in the neighborhood that I live. Lots of pumpkins, they start selling lots of pumpkins in the Walmart. I said, well, Americans must have loved the pumpkins a lot. So I didn't know that what is going on. So then I was totally unprepared for all this, and then lots of different clothing and stuff. And then suddenly kids appeared at my door, and then they said, trick and treat. I said, okay. And then they said again, trick and treat. I said, yes. I know what trick is, what treat is, but when it comes together, what does it mean? So what am I supposed to do? So they were like, okay. And then they went to the next, the door. Then when I follow, I learned that I was supposed to give the candies for that. So for next year, I was prepared. So with that experience, I learned that, okay, going to your neighbors is kind of okay here. So for next year, I decided to do not the same thing, but we have a tradition of Noah's pudding in Turkey. When the Noah's Ark landed on a mountain called Ararat, we claim that it is in Turkey, but it may not be. They wanted to make a celebration that they prepared like some kind of pudding or whatever they prepared. We claim that we know what it is, so we name our pudding in the Noah's pudding. So, but essentially they serve one another. Even now in the we have a Noah's pudding day. The neighbors, cook in Turkey, Muslim, Christian, Jews, no matter who they are. They cook Noah's pudding and serve the neighbors, basically. I wanted to do the same with our neighbors. I prepared I found a little cup with the lid. I put ingredients, and then my English was very poor at that time, so I prepared a little brochure that explained what it is. And then with a tray, I knocked my neighbor's door, and just imagine somebody knock at your door, a stranger accent, a newly moved to neighborhood, and then they have a tray. So the first neighbor didn't open. Second one came with a dog. No, man, I don't want it. And then the third one, finally the fourth one, on the road there was a couple, like an old couple, and they opened, and then since my language was poor, I just showed the paper, Noah's pudding, and then everything that I want to say is on the paper. So after they read, they welcomed me in, and we had a nice conversation. I don't know if they understood anything from what I said, but finally I remember them saying that they have been in that neighborhood for more than 10 years, and I am the first neighbor knocking their door. And this is the aha moment for me. I think I said I am on the right path, knock more doors. And I did the same thing last Christmas. I prepared the Christmas gift. I recently moved that neighborhood. Again, only one neighbor opened their door, which is, normal. You don't expect anyone in the evening, someone is knocking their door. But as a result, I could get to know at least one of them just opened their door, two of them just came again and thanks. So it's how we develop relationship. I just want to share that.
So, one of the things that I'm passionate about in terms of that connects to interfaith as well is combating racial injustice and really looking at institutionalized discrimination. And so bringing faith communities together, I think to organize, to form coalitions, to fight institutionalized discrimination, and to bring minorities together is something that I'm very passionate about. And that's something that I've been focusing on as well in terms of like bringing groups together. So if anyone's interested in that, feel welcome to talk to me.
I like walking, and I walk my neighborhood, and I really started waving at people because they drive too fast in my neighborhood, and I wanted them to see me with my little kids and like remotely feel guilty for like driving so fast. And they're like, I have a kid here, you can slow down. They haven't slowed down. I've been walking there for like 3 years, but people have started talking to me. They've started like stopping their car and talking to me. Even the garbage truck driver and I are on a first name basis now. And I've been meaning to for years to try to come up with a block party or something like that so they can come, like, you know, I'm thinking about signing it like the walking dog lady or something like that so they might know who I am. But I haven't done it yet, but this is encouraging. I think I just need to like pick a date and knock on some doors and make it happen.
It sounds like the common thread in everything that the five of you have been talking about is find a context where you're not 100% certain you're going to be comfortable and jump into it. And jump into it with grace, and jump into it with an expectation that you can learn, and jump into it with an expectation that the God that you worship will speak to you through that in some way or another. And what you're saying with, you've been thinking for years about doing this block party, it takes time. Because it takes time to build relationships. That I think is another theme from what we've all been talking about today, is that it's about relationships on a very profound level, and it takes time to build healthy relationships with anyone. But we do it anyways because it's very, very worth doing. I can't say I have an obvious next step for how do I engage with interfaith or interfaithful dialogues, partly because what I feel particularly called to be doing in this stage of my life is focusing on, again, racial reconciliation within among Christians. I see this as something where the church has a long and shameful history of racial division and racial discrimination, and this is an arena in which we really need to clean our own house before we can turn to the rest of the world, and so that when we turn to the rest of the world, we can say we have in fact grappled with this, and we want to share what we have learned by doing that, and we want to apologize for our failures before we started this process, during this process. We will fail after. It's a continuous process, but it's in some ways the only thing worth doing. So I can't say that I have a next step as regards interfaithful dialogues. I like that a lot. Other than, at the reception, Ahmed, I'd like to hear about the failed attempt to be an FBI agent.
That's a long story.
I'm sure I'm not the only one who saw that in your bio. It's like an interesting individual.
So first, let's give all of them a really big round of applause. Great food waiting for y'all, and lots of actual intrafaithing for y'all to engage in. But we really want y'all to stick around just to actually take time to sort of put the things that we've talked about into practice, and to actually make those relationships, and maybe meet someone who is a lot like you, who you didn't know was just around the corner. Everyone here is either from Rice, from Houston. They all have contact information, which you can ask for, which we can give to you, or meet someone who you wouldn't have otherwise met. So definitely take the time to do that. We have the space reserved till 4:30, so there's no hurry. So we're gonna
head over there now. But thank you all again for coming.
And thank you for organizing that.
Noticed that. I was like, what? The nice guy is
Go ahead. They know the questions.
also like a sport thing to have.
Okay, that's, I guess, a little wonderful. I was like, what is that?
I did like
Yeah.
Wow. I'm ready to go home.
okay, child.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I definitely like it.
We have a lot. Yeah, we're gonna all go
Respect.
Or is that like the transcendent? Not the transcendental.
They have each student has to read 2 books and then they can choose a 3rd book from
Martin Luther King had a lot of
the civil rights is still alive.
My daughter and I have started together. She's 13.
Doing podcasting stuff when I was so I was actually a little bit. I'm a volleyball player, so yeah. She did track me. I don't want to seem like she did. Yeah.